I got into digital marketing. First, I was essentially working for a company that resold stuff on eBay, and I was like their product manager. And I was cataloging for them. And then flash forward, maybe 2 years later or so, and I watched Shark Tank and saw a Wix website advertisement. And I created a Wix website in a couple hours and showed it to someone, and I was in marketing. I never got the chance to look back.
We've been in our business for years now, running multiple marketing campaigns, opting into multiple softwares that are supposedly helping our business. And there's just a ton of stuff we've aggregated over the years, but we never know, is it actually working? What is the data telling us? It's complicated, I know. And that's why on today's episode, I brought on Zach Jalbert. Zach Jalbert is a marketing and operations expert who helps companies scale with certainty using data without the need for expensive tech stacks or massive budgets. He's the founder of Tech Enterprise and developed the Eye of the Storm method, an integrated framework that aligns sales, marketing, and leadership. He's passionate about combating fraud and data manipulation and empowers marketing leaders to drive real results. So, Zach, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Happy to be here. What's going on, Dave?
Love it. Well, this is a big topic because, we've all been in this situation as solo founders, small agency owners, where we feel like we're kind of spinning our wheels sometimes. Like there's always like a new shiny thing to focus on. And so we invest our time into that, and then we start getting some feedback from that, and then we don't know, is it working? Is it not? So I know we've had a lot of conversations around the power of good data, of aligned teams, of aligned departments, and that all kind of funneling into something that we can like wrap our heads around. And that's why I want to get to the eye of the storm, which sounds like it's kind of the solution behind a lot of that. But before we do that,
I'm happy to talk about that too.
let's definitely touch on.
That intro you gave me was great, man. Thank you for that too. I think that everything you said, it's completely powerful. The questions that you kind of propose is it's about feelings, and I think that's so interesting. You bring that up is I think a lot of times people have all the data in front of them, but they don't really know how they feel about it, or they aren't sure what motivates them enough or compels them to act. So yeah, Eye of the Storm, and also some other methods that we've come up with to try to bring some clarity, even in the most uncertain times, right? That's something I'm super proud to talk to you about today.
For sure. Yeah, let's touch on that. But first, I like to kind of get to know the guest a little bit more. Let's take us back, right? Day one. So you've had these methods that we're going to get into, but I want to know what kind of story you've had to go through in order to be able to create these. So take us back day one. How'd you get into digital marketing, data analysis, and all that?
I don't tell this story often, but I love that. I love that you brought it back to here. So I got into digital marketing. First, I was essentially working for a company that resold stuff on eBay, and I was like their product manager. And I was cataloging for them. And then flash forward, maybe 2 years later or so, and I watched Shark Tank and saw a Wix website advertisement. And I created a Wix website in a couple hours and showed it to someone, and I was in marketing. I never got the chance to look back.
Well, that was the heyday for like web design too, because before that was a lot of, you had to do like HTML and all that stuff, but Wix and platforms like WordPress and such.
Shopify wasn't even really that big yet. We were probably, because I was in San Francisco at the time, so that helped a lot of it, because that's where all the innovation regarding e-commerce was coming out, like the Panda out in the Penguin algorithms would really hit a lot of companies, and Amazon was starting to really, and this is probably around, what was this? This is like 2000. This is like 2013, 2014, something around there. And yeah, it was like Wix, and it's funny. It was like Wix and Shopify's peeking its head out more and more, and everyone has 100 WordPress websites and 100 blogs, and then I went from there to being on an enterprise website development team doing a huge, huge Magento e-commerce site. Um, and I was doing all the product content for all because I told him about my background and I had built, I had met with a mentor of mine who showed me some of the ins and outs of what it took to build a website, picked it up pretty fast, and then became a part of this e-commerce team. It's a mattress store. They're still out there in San Francisco. It's called the Futon Shop. So we moved like 7 websites, a bunch of blogs, upgraded it to fit standards, and that's like the real transformation. I mean, there were a lot of me steps of me trying to break into marketing, but that's when I really cut my teeth was like, and we did this 10,000 page website in like about 6 months. We hammered it all out, and it
Well,
was
that's what I was going to say. So you went from, you kind of jumped off the deep end into website development, and then kind of even went above and beyond that with this like 10,000 page website. What were you trying? What resources were you kind of pulling in at that time to learn how to do this stuff? Like, had you been already kind of proficient in web dev, or like this is something you just threw yourself into and learned on the fly?
it's I think it's a little bit of both. So it's a great question that you say, well, what resources back then, the ecosystem and the pool of marketing resources, they weren't as good as they were. So I'm lucky because my mentor really took the skills that I had, like you said, which were like, cataloging, database management, just kind of like working in spreadsheets and building a system. And that's why I'm kind of more of an operations guy and a technical guy nowadays. Cause it's like you can send me a spreadsheet of infinite rows. And I'm just going to think to myself like, oh, okay, well, these 5 things are maybe interesting right now. So I think that, I always had a knack for kind of getting things not organized like to the point where you're just nitpicking things, but being able to make sense of really large systems, things that weren't necessarily all the way thought through, and improving them to a better standard. I didn't really get a lot of I didn't really get a lot of time for him to say, okay, yeah, take this course. Like literally the first day I showed up on that job, I taught myself HTML because I'd been using these builders and stuff. And I think, from the MySpace days or whatever, I had some, maybe basic knowledge, but literally, I guess when I look back and you say resource, I mean, Web3, I mean, I'm literally just getting an assignment that day, and I'm not looking out at the problem is that we were at a point where it was so necessary to innovate, because everyone was just copying each other during that. So really, I guess the situation at hand was all the times that I tried to go and find other methods to try and shortcut what was really hard work. My boss at the time, whose name is Sean Miller, pretty sure he's still out there. Shout out to you, Sean, if you're watching this in San Francisco. He wouldn't let me do that. He'd just say, you need to. He'd always say, "This is good, but we need to go further. This isn't where we're going." And I learned very quickly that there are a lot of resources out there as an auditor. There's a lot of checklists, but if you have a vision, um, trying to find someone else's plan can kind of slow you down. So I nowadays I have tons of resources. Now that I'm in the marketing technology space, I mean, I could list them, Chief Martech, Martech Tribe, martech.org. We have resources on our website we're trying to build. So I think nowadays, now that everything's so micro workflow driven and there's so many niches, I think people are so much more equipped to handle problems as they come. Um, but it was all about driving the ecosystem forward at that time. So I think other than the Hoth, I'll shout out the Hoth.
Oh yeah, the Hoth. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but I think at that point, I mean, it was really just coding stuff, and I would get I would get anything that I needed to learn really from my boss at that time. He was
Yeah.
very concerned with me really doing all the things that he thought other SEO and web development companies were doing to just take shortcuts. And he told me he wanted to get rid of that. So he kind of put me in the dark in some ways, which I'm really thankful he did. And then in others, he just was like, "You're gonna learn the hard stuff. You're gonna learn how to code. You're gonna learn how to build a giant spreadsheet of products." And there was no AI back then.
Yeah. Sounds like you were just like, it was like trial by fire. This needs to get done, so figure it out, which is personally for me, that's the way I prefer to learn as well. And I just, I come out of it with knowledge, not just information. So that's awesome. So all right, so then you sink your teeth and you kind of like earn your stripes, if you will, with through this like 10,000 page website. Where do you kind of go from there? What's the next step in your career?
Well, I that gig ended a little bit after the site was over. Um, and so then I started freelancing and I kind of became a full stack marketer at that point. And I did that for a couple years with success. I mean, we actually ended up doing like a magazine ad, and we were working with furniture companies in San Francisco, mostly. And then I'd branch out. I was always, I wasn't really, there was only so many periods that it was really full-time work. I mean, and that's funny because I worked 7 days a week, but I always kind of had like a side job on the weekends, or, something to kind of uh, get me just out and about of the house. So from commercial real estate to furniture, high-end furniture, home services and home goods, things like that. Lot of experience in really I want to say like the pillars of website experience, like from e-commerce to local services to just straight up like information based websites or charities. I kind of at at the maybe the fifth or sixth year of my career, I had done a lot of different marketing campaigns and managed and built more sites too. So by the time I was like 6 or 7 years in my career, my technical background was great. My operations background was great. I had a lot of experience leading teams, like merging creative with strategy and technical. Like I was in between all three, all pretty much all of those jobs. And so that I hope that answers the question is that's what I was really doing was freelancing and getting more experience with all the different CRMs. That was a huge deal, was knowing every single CRM.
Hey, Blueprint fam, if you're enjoying today's episode and finding my guest insights valuable, then you'll definitely want to subscribe to the Personal Brand Blueprint podcast as we drop weekly guest interview episodes just like this one. And on that note, you obviously also see firsthand how powerful being an effective guest, like the one you're watching on this episode right now, can be at attracting qualified, interested leads directly into your sales funnel. But I know what you're thinking. You want to get into guest podcasting, but starting feels confusing and overwhelming. What equipment do you need? And how do you look and sound great? And how do you turn listeners into leads? I know this because so many of my guests had these exact problems in the past. And that is why I created the Podcast Guest Mastery Blueprint. It's a simple but powerful breakdown on everything you need to look, sound, and convert great as a podcast guest. Everything from how to set up your recording area to what equipment you need to look and sound great on camera, and what to say on podcasts to stand out, be memorable, and earn the audience's trust. And then that one key strategy to turn listeners into leads. I'm telling you, this isn't just another checklist. This is a step-by-step blueprint to make sure you look, sound, and present your best on podcasts so you can convert that attention into leads and ultimately new business. I honestly was thinking about selling this for like $97, but I'd rather give access to this guide to my Personal Brand Blueprint podcast audience for free. So if you are ready to become a sought after podcast guest and use it to generate leads and build your personal brand, and grab your copy of Podcast Guest Mastery Blueprint at davepoly.com/podcast blueprint. You can find the link to that in the show notes below. Again, that's davepoly.com/podcast blueprint, and start turning podcast interviews into business. Again, it's completely free for being a loyal listener, so definitely check it out. Cool? All right, let's get back to the conversation. So these websites weren't just like static websites, but a lot of these companies needed some sort of like integration into a CRM as well.
I think a lot of it was working with the sales teams and it really helping them understand, yeah, like maybe even how to qualify the leads in the CRM was some conversations. But I think a lot of times it was I didn't necessarily have to look too deep into stuff because a lot of companies back then, to have a CRM, I mean, this is when like, HubSpot is really trying to take over and you know, you'd probably be talking to them about maybe 5 or 6 different types of strategies, social media, SEO. Should we just get a new website? How do we do our paid ad? I mean, it's all of it, emails. And so,
Would that be, would they say, hey, I need a website? And that's the kind of the intro to the conversation. But as you start to kind of have speak kind of longer in the conversation, you realize, oh, wait, you don't just need a website. You kind of need this full system here.
right,
You
right.
need the full engine.
I mean, yeah, it did. And it's funny you bring that up because that was a big struggle was to take, I didn't have any at that point when I was a freelancer and I didn't have an agency or a team or, I was still just trying to get my feet wet in a lot of regards because there was so many new things coming out all the time. And I didn't have the foundation or the confidence to really drive things, but we realized that a lot of these companies, a lot of these leaders, they had either heard about something from their boss or they were interested in the technology, but their priorities were completely removed from the conversation they were having in marketing. And I think that happens a lot. And yeah, it's hard because you start to diagnose and you have a company who maybe has a limited budget and you realize that, they want leads, but what they really need is a bunch of pictures of their products on their website. And before you drive the traffic to them they need to maybe assess, a lot of the times you just find like a website was broken on a phone too, or something like that. So, so yeah, that was it, whole system. And that's kind of what led us to create what you brought up earlier, Eye of the Storm. And it's been working great so far.
Yeah, let's get into that. So, I mean, sounds like through your experience, it's been a lot of kind of, in a way, you were like the human eye of the storm. Like you had to be kind of like the center of everything and
You,
being kind of like educating them
yeah.
on what needs to happen, but also being like the source of truth for what's going on in their marketing business. So like what was like the inspiration behind, well, first of all, what is Eye of the Storm? Let's start there. Like give us an idea of what actually Eye of the Storm is.
Eye of the Storm is our approach to handling all the most important aspects of modern marketing, from customer journey to sales alignment, customer databases. So it's a holistic approach that kind of merges the branding and the traditional side of marketing with the technical side and really most importantly, the true needs of operating a company's marketing cost effectively. So I mean, we start off with really understanding what data a company has, and then you move to more high level conversations that a CMO would have, right? It's technically kind of more of a fractional service. But a lot of times companies love our plan and then we work with them on operations. So it's heavily reliant on just modernizing a company's operations and hitting the nail on the head on the pillars of what just customers in general expect from a great marketing campaign, right? So uh, anything from media buying, website development, website management, content. That's a big word, but I mean it's definitely a pillar. And then you also have data analytics, your sales database, your advertising placements. We can also give you product management systems as well. And it's systems based. So it essentially, it's great if you have a team. It's great if you're trying to build a team. But it essentially just provides clarity and it allows you to stop being so reactive and stop being uncertain about wasting money and more important, your time. I think it's really a huge resource because the systems are kind of integrated with this AI and we use a lot of tools like fine tuning GPTs and things like that. But it's really in the best interest of not just cutting corners. I mean, a lot of it is cutting out a lot of the frivolous work, but also it's about gaining everywhere, superior understanding and helping your company as a whole just buy into marketing, as something that's worth paying attention to and being excited about.
Yeah. So what is it? How do we interact with it? Or how do we like view it? It sounds like this is kind of the aggregation and the kind of summation of everything that's going on across departments into like something that everyone can wrap their heads around. What does that look like from like a actual engagement standpoint? Like how do people access it? What is it?
Well, we actually can do it through any one of your project management softwares that you'd like. I mean, we prefer Notion or we can do ClickUp or Monday.com. I mean, the first step is aligning. Do you have a project management framework? Do you have an operations framework going on? Where can we see your logs? So we start with auditing. We start with assessing your tech stack, and then we work hand in hand with you to essentially align your strategy with what needs to happen and what you need to monitor. So a lot of it is from building tools for the company, or assessing tech stack options, all the way to building custom workflows for, let's say you have a social media manager, we'll build them a dashboard, or we'll tell them, hey, this is probably what, moving on from like a calendar, this is probably what I would update. So a lot of it is guidance, like you said, high level consulting. But we can get as deep as they'd like because we have, some IT experience as well. And we work very closely with developers, and it's really however aligned we can be, is how you access it.
Yeah. It sounds like there's so much data that kind of floats around a company and like, again, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, we opt into so many of these like softwares and we run all these campaigns and there's just so much that's going on. Sometimes it's like sensitive information. So for someone like you to come in, is there any types of like hurdles that you have to get over in terms of like people kind of giving you the keys to the kingdom, if you will? Because it sounds like you really have to kind of get ingrained into their business. Has that ever been kind of an issue?
Not lately, but I think that that is something that comes along with just knowing what compliance standards really are. Um, so risk assessment for a CMO, risk is essentially probably half of any topic he talks about, or he or she. And so I think that is something that we enter agreements in with. There needs to be a lot of good faith there, obviously, because we are kind of in your house. You do got to trust us. But we care, and we're here, we're accountable. We want to make sure that people feel safe, and we're lucky because it's less of an issue now because we actually have a couple of great partners that, they're very credible. They work with government. They, we're HIPAA compliant. Tech is, and I myself, I have a background in technical marketing is pretty much half of my background, and safety and security is something that we talk to companies a lot about. So it is a question, and it's an opportunity because a lot of times companies want to be more compliant, and we kind of sometimes help them understand how to not necessarily position their leadership as like enforcers, right? So it's one of those things where they want to be more compliant, they want to be more safe, and we are absolutely there step by step to help them be, you know, on the forefront of security, especially as everything gets more, like I think one thing, like even just phishing itself, like just simple things like that. Your IT partner maybe can catch an issue after it happens, but the level of prevention we can help companies with is typically something they're really excited about.
Yeah. So you sounds like one of the key words that we were mentioning at the beginning here was just trying to avoid like fraud and incorrect information, incorrect data,
I think
and being
positioning too.
transparent.
Yeah, like positioning data too, right?
Yeah. So
Of
and like I I think the core pillar it sounds like for your business is transparency and honesty.
Mhm.
Where like where did this because with agencies it can be pretty difficult because you never really know what is going on in the background and what they're actually doing. Um, and like I said, you're giving them the keys to the kingdom, and you're hoping that they're going to help you grow and that they're have your best interest in mind. And it sounds like this is kind of a core value of the business. This is kind of in the masthead for you. Like, where did that come from? What drove that?
Well, I think if we it kind of has to do with what happened after kind of that period we were talking about where I was cutting my teeth and I went because I felt like I needed to legitimize my expertise by, I don't know, finding companies to work for that could maybe boost my resume a little bit.
Some
And I went
logos.
and I went I went there and I just realized just the need for transparency um is really an ethics situation, and it's becoming less of an ethics call and more of really just a reality check for companies, because the marketing industry is driven by software right now, and the data is used to kind of sell the software to these resellers that are our agencies. And what happens is all the agencies, they use the same software because that's best practices, and then they're all getting the same types of data, and a lot of them are not really building a company's data. they're just feeding they're just feeding the activity into their tools and then using the tools to essentially produce reports that explain what people are paying for in terms that they feel good about.
Mhm.
And I saw fraud. I mean, I can't say I didn't. I mean, I've seen fraud pretty pretty clearly, and I think sometimes you're kind of in a situation where, yeah, maybe the numbers aren't amazing, but you're doing the work. You're in a period where the numbers don't look terribly sexy, but they are what they are. And you kind of have to be, it's like a marriage, and you have to be kind of ready to go through the times that aren't as exciting as you are ready to go through the times that are. And a lot of companies kind of, especially marketing companies that charge by the hour, they they really incentivize activity because it does look good on reports. And people are most of the time, especially ones that work with marketing agencies, a lot of companies will say, I like my reports, but I don't understand enough of it, or it doesn't necessarily speak all the way or align all the way to my goals as a company. So, I mean, just beyond fraud, I think that the whole idea of transparency being our mission, it comes from some personal setbacks that I had at some agencies, of course. Not to necessarily call attention to something that was just, a complete scandal. I mean, there was some surprises that I would uncover. And I just felt the need for reform. And so what happened was after I after I left the last agency, I literally wrote that the next day. So I got let go by an agency because I was pretty vocal about how I felt like they weren't being transparent, and there were things that they were playing politics with accounts is kind of what it started to look like. And then they were using, you know, numbers from different tools to kind of piece together a story. But behind the scenes, you know, they just weren't really aligned. And so from there, after them saying, you know, we're going to do this the way we want to do it, it's our call, not yours. I went home and I started writing out kind of my ethics statement, and I thought to myself, you know, this is something as people rely more on data and numbers to make the calls, and they have to trust the people who are telling the story. I kind of realized that, you know, this was something that I really felt there was a gap in the industry. And
Yeah, it sounds like that's kind of the inception then, yeah, kind of for the, you know, the transparency for the eye of the storm. That's awesome. So what's like the core problem then when you're injecting the eye of the storm into a business? What's like the core problem that you are typically trying to solve within that business?
we want to legitimize them fast. So it's all about taking taking the taking what has been done and elevating it to where it all integrates, and it's something that, you know, it doesn't need to be explained. You know, there's clear value. There's clearly improvement when you compare it side by side with competitors now. Um, you know, I mean, positioning and things like that, kind of those traditional models. But the number one thing you want to do is you want to understand the alignment between the customer, the organization, and then all of the platforms and all of the digital placements and all of the robots and crawlers. You know, maybe what they are trying to see or what they're trying to verify. So it's kind of like this three-pronged approach, which said a customer's potential and current. You know, are we communicating with them? Are we creating a digital online culture, a digital experience that separates us from our competition, builds a lot of trust, you know, shows that we're a company worth paying a premium for. You know, we really prefer to work with brands, because they just have more longevity. Um, Also too, I mean, they're doing things that are more accountable than just a kind of a company that's not trying to become recognized like a brand. And then company culture, you know, how do we feel about our marketing? How do we make sure that marketing is supporting everyone, HR, sales, leadership, IT? We just look at the different departments and try to bridge those gaps with bridge processes really fast. Set a timeline, and then the last part, as I mentioned, um, which is like, well, what does Google see? You know, what is the data? You know, what is happening in the customer database, and what's your spend and why is it going there? And so that's really more the auditing side, like hardcore. That's
Speaking of auditing, there's a framework I saw. I was checking into Tech Enterprise called the API framework. Can you walk me through what that is?
Yeah, API. We named it that kind of as a play on, because companies all the time, you know, they want a company that or a marketing agency that is sophisticated with technology, um, and integrations and automation and whatnot. And we built the API framework so that marketing managers and marketing leadership could understand how to essentially build a data strategy, no matter how competent your team is. API will work with top of the top data experts all the way down to, uh, I hate looking at spreadsheets. I hate looking at reports. And it's a framework that takes you from how do we understand the data and how do we use the data to, how do we build data that's actually better than our competitors' data so that we get an advantage and we can actually implement better customer journeys and a lot of it is better AI as we get into the age of information, or we move past the age of information to the age of intelligence and automation. You really need a data strategy and not just, a bunch of different sources that you review without as much context as you need. So holistic data strategy, skill gaps, we can clarify reporting, things like that. Also compliance, making sure that data, people are incentivized to be responsible and be caretakers of data. It can be pretty holistic, but we've tried to boil it down in our guide. Actually, I don't know if you found the API guide 3-step framework ebook, and that tries to give a general overview of what is the first steps of creating a data strategy. Not an overwhelming one.
Yeah. Well, when we talk about data strategy, because like I said in the beginning of this podcast, it can kind of feel overwhelming. What are some of the because we get inundated with just information and data, social engagement data, Google Analytics data and stuff like what are like the numbers we should really be focused on that tell like the best story about how well our business is doing?
Well, I mean, surveys are always great, right? So I think data. There's so many different types of data sets, and there's so many different types of data structures, and ones that you can verify very clearly are always good. And I think if I was smart, I would have just said back to you, oh, just sales. But I think that as marketing itself, um, you know, as AI is used more and more to manipulate things and cut corners, like I kind of was getting at, opinions matter. And I don't just mean like opinions. I mean like consensus and building alignment, um, and people's own ability to judge things kind of needs to be put into clear, understandable numbers. And not just the data that you have from your tech stack that you already have. So I mean, if you're organized, most of it can give you insight and give you a lot of info regarding what is probably going right or what could be going better. But I think it's the idea that you can build data by simply interacting with your customers and you know being someone who's being a company that's innovative. You can actually create data. So I think the data you want to focus on is the data that you need to build in the future to really gain a competitive advantage over your rivals. Those who are really threatening the company, and those can be external, those can be internal. So that's what I always say is, let's look at what we have right now, but let's also look at what we need to build and how we verify that what we are building is meeting uh meeting beyond a standard of what our competitors have.
Is there typically data that you see you go into a new business and there's just like critical data that they should be collecting because it will drastically improve their sales and across departments that you commonly see businesses are just not collecting for some reason?
Well, I think that it's always a matter of what size or where they're at, but yeah, I think every company has either data they're not utilizing. Most companies already have probably too much, and they need to maybe cut down on what they're paying attention to. Um, but I mean, if a lot of times you can just ask a company about their customer data, and you'll probably find out most of what you need to know about it.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome. If we, if you wanted to kind of put an exclamation mark on one point that you talked about today that you just want to make sure you drive home for our audience today? What's like the one thing you want our audience to take home with them?
Don't buy any more audits. Don't buy any more audits unless unless you understand how it informs your strategy. And um you you do not have to be a slave to the market. You can find high level data expertise, um, and you can definitely align your company more quickly than you would if you hire, you know, some fancy executive, or if you buy an amazing analytics suite or tech stack. You know, it all starts with a culture of data, and it also it kind of ends um with to being committed to realize that you're never going to have a perfect scenario on your hands. You know,
Mm,
there's always room for improvement. And I guess if you'd love to learn more about how we can align your company's data for growth and growth operations, check out our website, tekenterprise.com, TEK enterprise.com. And you can go to our process page, but it's right on our homepage as well. So you can go and download that, and we'd love you to check it out.
yeah. You mentioned a guide as well, a free guide as well.
Yeah, free guide. It's up there. It's short and sweet. It's very actionable. Kind of outlines everything you said. Like, what exactly do we want? You know, how do we audit that we have the right data, and what's the process for making sure that it's trustworthy, and then also a little bit of a sneak peek of, you know, how do we make sure that we do it better than our competitors as well.
Dope. Love that. All right, Zach, I appreciate your time today. That's all for today's episode of Personal Brand Blueprint. Today, we learned about my guest's origin story, unique methods, and credibility. If you want to see me break down how today's guest can use those tools within the Personal Brand Blueprint strategy to attract, convince, and convert new qualified leads so you can do the same for your business, then check out this episode here. Or if you want to continue to hear more incredible personal branding origin stories and learn more valuable personal branding skills from my awesome guests, then check out the full playlist of interviews here.